Lovely. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us on a Saturday. Very kind of you to join us and support this week of virtual talks with the Cornwall's Maritime Churches project. I'm delighted to welcome Douglas here today. He's going to be talking about a really interesting subject all around travelling saints and the emergence of the Maritime Church. Now, I'm sure Douglas will talk about this more at the end of his talk, but we actually became acquainted via Twitter and Instagram. And Douglas is in fact the founder of the popular Devon Churchland website and Instagram channel. And so I've invited Douglas to come and talk to us today and take us back to the roots of the project, as it were. And he's going to be talking about the emergence of the Maritime Church and how it's been facilitated by the travels of Celtic Saints. So from discussing the plantation of Cornwall's and Devon's considered maritime churches, both coastal and those upriver, to how we might find clues in the landscape to understand how Christianity has, in fact, geographically travelled since antiquity. So this talk will also question why and how churches can be perceived as vessels for both Christian and maritime ideologies. So without further ado, I will pass it over to you, Douglas. Are you ready to share your screen?
Yep.
Lovely.
I've got host disabled screen sharing.
Oh, my fault. There we are. I've allowed you to share your screen now. Sorry about that. And for everybody who's just joined us, just to remind you to maintain your mute or make your microphone mute throughout Douglas's talk. And if you have any questions, please place them in the chat icon at the bottom of your screen.
Okay.
Lovely, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, hello, my name's Douglas, as you know. Let's just go straight in. Some of this is going to be speculative, some of this is going to be common sense. Not a lot of it is going to be academic, because there's very few primary sources. And hopefully it'll just give a different perspective on Christianity in Devon, early Christianity, allied with Cornwall as well. Not necessarily right, not wrong, just different and hopefully a bit of fun. For those who are from abroad, we're just looking now at the bottom left down at Devon and Cornwall, the peninsula there. And we want to look at how it relates to the maritime environment, not the land one, how folks relate to all this, and what it has to do with Christianity in the southwest. It's so little is known. It's a bunch of might be's. And let's look at the peninsula. And we can look at how isolated this place is. It's not apparent with modern communications, but it only has one decent land access following the Arrow, down between the Exmoor and Quantock Hills to the north and the Blackdown Hills in the south. And it's no coincidence that the capital of Somerset, which is a very rich, fertile region, was placed right in that gap to stop us Devon folk coming up and taking it, basically. Somerset is much, much richer than Devon. So when you get down through that gap, you have a nice drive down to Somerset, or a nice ride, or a nice walk down to Exeter. The rest of it is hard work. It's full of combes and valleys. Combes are steep-sided valleys, one after another, very difficult to navigate, extraordinarily hard to govern. It's a bit like Afghanistan, with lots of local leaders and clans who can appear and disappear in front, behind, beside your army, which is where you don't want them. It's highland country, in other words. It's where you don't really want to go. And this makes Devon and Cornwall, as I said, not only hard to govern, but also it's a place that looks towards the sea and towards the water. It's a water country. It's full of rivers. It's full of navigable rivers. Not so much nowadays, but we'll come to that in a moment. Rivers mainly fed by Dartmoor in the south, huge peat sponge in the high moors, and the same with Exmoor in the north. And the River Tamar, which isn't fed by these, from the coming down the north and making the modern-day boundary between Devon and Cornwall. So instead of just a maritime environment, we're really talking about a more water environment. most of these rivers were navigable from the sea in the past. And folks wouldn't have had the same categories as we have now, where we think of like the sea and the land and nothing else in between. The water environment is what they thought of as the maritime environment. The rivers were clear running then. There was no water extraction, no weirs, no mills, not so much silting from mining, no agricultural runoff and ploughing and stuff, no bridges. Floods could clear the riverbeds easier, possibly make them deeper. There is a very different scene then, except they did have much more marshes. Marshes are also part of the maritime environment, not least because they're a major, major food source in the past. Water birds, fish, eels, amphibians, frogs and stuff. And also a source of very good for resources, things like reed for thatching, plants for eating, and much safer than open water too. Most of the marshes, both inland and on the coast, have been drained now, like this one on the River Exe, or on the left, that meadow there used to be marshland, and the seawall now keeps it drained and good for cattle. So let's go back here for a moment. We can't expand landwards. We can't really trade without the permission of the Somerset folk, and they're going to charge us lots of money. And another reason, if you look at Britain, you'll see that it's divided up into the lowland area, which is the area on the bottom right, and the highlands. And the lowland area is really the place that you want if you're going to rule the country. The rest is not. So already we're looking at very different cultures from prehistory times, and we'll come to that in a moment. And by absurd coincidence, if you look at the map of pre-Roman Celtic coins, these were coins that were issued by the local polities before the Romans came, it exactly matches the previous area. It's only in the lowland areas, the rich areas, that they monetize the economy. And of course, when you monetize the economy, you make the economy a cash economy. The cash tends to go back into the power elite. So the highlands are hard to conquer, hard to govern, bad farmland. Trade with them, on the whole, was cheaper than war and governing, unless you had much better tech. This map, too, shows the different maritime cultures that you had in England up until relatively recently, until you had ships capable of doing big ocean voyages. In the north, you had the east coast, which connected with Scandinavia and the Baltics. In the south, you had the southern counties, which did trade with France and the Netherlands and a bit of Germany. And in the southwest, we went down towards over to Brittany and down towards Spain, Portugal, and around into the Mediterranean. Or more's the point, the Mediterranean came to us until we had the right ships. So this would form a very distinct cultural sphere since prehistory. And let's call it the Western maritime culture, including Brittany. Britain is easy to forget, but it's always been there. And including contacts with the Eastern Mediterranean, which definitely were there from about the 13th to the 12th century BC. These are ingots that were dug out, that were saved from shipwrecks from Turkey, off the coast of Turkey and Israel, and that have been identified as coming from Devon, Cornwall by isotopic analysis, I think, or something like that. But it's pretty solid evidence. So there's trade going back to prehistory, and this was, again, I'm going to repeat myself, this was a distinct cultural sphere. Much more cosmopolitan too than the rest of England at the time. And I want to repeat this point, because when we talk about early Christianity, we're not talking about Celtic Christianity with its ideas of Irish Christianity coming across and everything. We're talking about it more like a Brittonic Christianity, a British Christianity with you. It came from this culture. And the religion originally brought here soon after Christ's death, probably, just fermenting away in near isolation. Fed isolation, obviously, from the Eastern Roman Empire As the Western Roman Empire declined, the Eastern Roman Empire took over, and it would be what we recognize today as the Orthodox Church, but back then it was just the church. How did they get around? And this is important because it comes back into how the maritime culture came inland very well. Well, as we saw from this map, it's not really good for growing crops. It's all hilly and everything. What it is good for, it's Devon and Cornwall, is cattle. It's cattle country. Cows and later sheep, cows and bulls, cattle, the same as Ireland. And so they made their boats from leather. This is a painting of a more modern boat called a carrack from Ireland, made from leather with a wooden frame. You'd grease the leather, and it's very, very seaworthy. It skips over the waves, as opposed to the waves coming to swamp you. This is probably more ocean-going carrack, used for sailing long distances. The mast could be stepped down, it could be taken down if need be. The sails also would be made from leather. And just to reiterate this point, this is a model from between the 1st century BC and the 3rd century AD, which was discovered in 1896 in Northern Ireland. And it's a gold, and it's a model of a carrack with oars, with sails, with benches for the rowers, a rudder. And this has been going on this kind of ship has been used for a long, long time. But coming up to the idea of the rivers, you might need something smaller to get up the rivers. So we're going to be using a coracle, which again is the same idea, leather covered. Nowadays you tend to use canvas. It could either be used for fishing and stuff, or you could take it off and put in goods, and you could take goods upstream or downstream. The advantages of coracles for navigating inland is that you can carry them, or you can put them on a pack horse if necessary. Easily carried for portages. A portage is a passage from a river to river. So you could go up a river from the north coast. You could go up a river and then carry your coracle over to a river flowing south. In ancient Samaria, even then, they used these. They took them down the Euphrates full of goods to trade with places like Babylon. Then they put them on a donkey to take them up north again, and they disassembled them before putting them on the donkey, and repeated the process again and again. So this is just an ancient way of using rivers as transport. Here, from a extremely complicated, the blue are river routes. And you can see not all of them will be navigable, but a lot will be, especially considering the low draft of the coracles. Immensely detailed with portages. If you want more detail than this, in more finer detail, go to dawnmist.org, and she has this all. So we don't have a culture here. We have a thriving civilization, both here, Wales, and in Ireland. And this is something sometimes missed out. Now, with Christianity, the first hint that Christianity came to Britain was from Saint Aristobulus in the 1st century AD, which apparently is one of the apostles, or one of the second generation apostles. And he's meant to have come in and preached, and there's a story that he was martyred in the mountains of Wales. That's a story. Whether it's true or not, I don't know. But he's reasonably well attested, bringing Christianity probably to the southwest, which would be the obvious way to come. Tertullian, in about 200 AD, writes that the extremities of Spain, the various parts of Gaul, the regions of Britain which had never been penetrated by Roman arms have received the religion of Christ. He's got no interest to big that up particularly. And the interesting thing is that he says it's not penetrated by Roman arms, which exactly matches the southwest, Wales and Ireland. Here we have a 4th century piece of pottery from Exeter, with the Cairo symbol on. You can see it closer here. It's not a very well drawn one, but it's definitely a Christian Cairo symbol. And here, from the 5th century, we have a stone from Hale, now put into the new modern church, which again shows the Cairo symbol, Hale in Cornwall. Carving it on stone, that's a biggie. Stone was expensive. The other evidence we have, there's more evidence than this, but one of the bigger parts of evidence we have for early Christianity down here in the southwest are these inscription stones. I think there's about 17 in Devon. There's more in Cornwall. I'm not quite sure there's numbers, but this is one from South Devon. They're mainly in Latin. They're from about 450 to about 700. Don't quote me on those dates. Some are written in Latin. Some are written in ogam, which are those straight lines incised on the sides, and some are bilingual. This here is bilingual, and it says both in Latin and in English something of Saphacus, son of Quicus, which are Latinized British names. This indicates very strongly that these memorial stones were Christian. They still considered themselves part of Roman civilization, even though the Romans had gone. And they're distributed quite well around the country. Only the ogam stones, the ones with Irish on, tend to be near rivers, which again is very interesting. In fact, most of them seem to be near rivers. So it's very much still part of the maritime culture, going up and down the rivers, not considering the sea and the coast as barriers. Problem with Devon is that there's only really 2 attested British churches up in the north, Hartland, which is the St. Nectans, and Braunton, which is St. Brannock's. But if we can, let's look at these and in the context of the maritime. St. Nectan's Hartland, what we can see here is 15th century. He's said to have come from Ireland. It's universally accepted as being a British founded or Irish founded or Celtic founded monastery. It's set in a headland away from anything, near the sea. It's got a landing place near it. There's various other landing places. It's quite a rocky coast, this one. It's directly opposite from Ireland and Wales, so it's obviously easy access. And it's a perfect place to plant a monastery. Then you have St. Brannock's in Braunton with its Norman tower. The tower is actually probably one of the earliest towers in England, going by tree ring dating, which they did a few years ago. It's a marvelous church. It's also a marvelous situation, very, very maritime. It's up there in the red circle. It's beautifully situated. If you look at these ovals from the top down, it has hills for the cattle and sheep. It has flat land for the arable, and most of those buildings wouldn't have been present. The church just at the edge and a few houses around. It has marshland, a very high calorie resource, and then not marked, but obvious, you have the estuary, the river, and the sea for fish, seals, lots of seals, dolphins, more fish. In subsistence farming terms, it's an extremely rich place to be. Now let's look at a couple of churches that are still part of the maritime environment, but not so obvious and aren't attested as having British origins, but could be. St. Nonna's Bradston in West Devon, near the River Tamar. Forget the dedication. It's St. Nonna was the mother of David, St. David, but that seems to be a later dedication. It's got a holy well next to it, which is one indication that it might be a British or Celtic plantation. It's near the river. On the right-hand circle is Bradstone Church. The middle circle is the river crossing over the Tamar. So it's near a river and it's near a river crossing. These churches and chapel were built to help people. One of them to be built for is after a river crossing, a dangerous river crossing, as a lot of river crossings were. They would come and be aid to travelers. And then you have another holy well there, St. Bridget's Well, which is across the river. So St. Bridget, we'll come to this in a moment. St. Bridget was a common thing around here. If you look at how it's situated in the maritime environment, the crossing is about the furthest up you could have reached by boat on the Tamar. After that, in the green shaded area, it was going to be marshland. Nowadays it's drained, but all this is flat, where two rivers meet. It would have been deep marshland, heavily flooded, very difficult to find your way through. So potentially that's the highest point of easy navigation in the Tamar as well. And looking at it a bit closer, you can see how the hills come together then, making it a perfect spot. The bridge there was built in about 1450, I think. And before that, there'd been a ferry, and before that, there'd have been a ford. Looking at the area, there's three parishes, one across the river in Cornwall. That's got Lawitton, which is from the Welsh, Gwith, excuse my pronunciation, which is a Welsh person, Nans, Middle Cornish Valley, Lan, enclosed cemetery. Then you have Dunderton nearby, which for a Devon parish has got a Celtic name, which is very, very unusual in Devon. And Dun or Din comes from a fort. Treth or Tress is for a farmstead from primitive Welsh, and the Tun is an English addition. Bradstone itself is called Broadstone, but I suspect that's re-engineering. Somebody found a big stone nearby and interpreted it as Broadstone. It could just as easily be Bridstone, Bridestone, Bridgetstone, St. Bridget. And as there are two other very old churches nearby, Bridstow and Virginstow, which are dedicated to St. Bridget, the Irish St. Bridget, it's a very strong contender for a British church. The other one is further downriver, Beerferres. Beerferres was a mining town in the Middle Ages, but before that, it's where the Tavi and the Tamar join. Perfect place, very much part of the maritime culture. And if you're going to look for Holy Well, then up the top there, you've got Hallowell Wood, which one strong interpretation of that is obviously Holy Well Wood. There's also, next to the Holy Well Wood, there's also the little creek, perfect for boats. If you look at the Google map, again, you find the same thing. This is a creek. It's got a well. There's a picture of it's still in existence, the well now. The silting is more modern. It comes from the mining. It comes from a dam bit upriver. What it used to be like before is probably much more navigable. Nowadays, at the low tide, you can't reach the shore. This would have been very different then, even in the Middle Ages, because they built a jetty down at Beerferres for silver export. So coming back to this map, why are there so few British church sites? And I'm ignoring the church sites that have British saints, because a lot of them seem they might have been added later. Some might not, but we're not sure. Well, the simple answer, and probably the easiest, there's more than one answer. Obviously, the simple answer is, we think of it there being one Reformation of King Henry VIII, and starting with Henry VIII and beyond. But really, there are three Reformations that swept over Devon. The first one was the Saxon culture that came over and took over the British culture before Cornwall. They had big problems with the British Church because the Saxon culture was more Roman influenced. It had something to do with Easter date. It founded and refounded villages. It changed the villages a lot because they were making the economy in the countryside into their own vision. It was a literate culture, so they could define the place names. And so if a Saxon guy called Bert had taken over a farm and they asked his name, it's called Bert's Farm, that would be written down. This literacy reached Cornwall apparently before the Saxon culture took it over. So a lot of the Cornish place names were recorded in writing before the Saxon culture, before the Saxon government and Saxon culture governed it. So a lot of the Cornish place names tend to be original, more original to the British. Then you had the Norman Conquest, which smashed everything. And that was very Roman Catholic. It was actually the start of what we know as Roman Catholicism and the Pope. And they conquered England under the banner of the Pope. And they rebuilt all the churches, totally redesigned the economy and the way it ran, and violent and everything. And then you had the Reformation, what we know of as the Reformation, Henry VIII's Reformation, where a lot of all the dedications, if not most of them, were forgotten, because he were, especially towards the Puritan time, the Commonwealth time, the idea of dedicating a church to a saint was considered highly papist and very, very wrong. And it wasn't until the 18th century that dedication started coming back, and a lot of them were either invented or just given new ones. So finally, coming back to here, let me leave you with this one. This is the last slide. Looking at this is a map of medieval chapels with holy wells in Devon. And it's exciting, well, in some sense anyway, is that these are clustered around the coasts. You've got the south coast, the north coast, some in the middle. And these, if you're going to be looking for more aspects of early Christianity in Britain, their church plantations, would be the place to look. And that very strongly has been part of the maritime culture. Even the ones inland tend to be along rivers, not all of them, but some of them. So when we look at this and look at the other evidence, and there's a bit more around too, we can start to glimpse a pattern through a fog, which occasionally clears and not, and needs a lot more work, obviously, and it's highly speculative. But hopefully, leaves you with more questions and answers. Okay, thank you.
Lovely, thank you so much, Douglas. What a fascinating insight into the significance of location, I think, above all. I think what you really managed to convey is actually how complex and layered these sites are. And I'm sure many people who are with us today, depending on their discipline, will approach these sites differently or with their own perspective. So I think you really managed to convey the significance of location, but also how important its historic location and environment are really shaping these churches. So just whilst everyone is thinking of perhaps a question or a comment they'd like to send over to Douglas, if I could just start off with a question, Douglas. And I think it's really important for our students who are on this live virtual talk to ask your research methodology. How do you approach these churches and your research?
Mainly by photography and social media. A lot of reading as well from various sources, but what I call forensic photography, and I started off with finding the beauty in these churches, and to do that you need to take them in very, very good detail as far as I'm concerned. And then by posting on social media, especially Instagram, I started, you get a lot of enthusiasts, experts, far more expert than me, who can come along and comment, but you also get enthusiasts, just people who appreciate them, giving you very different perspectives and pointing out things that you hadn't noticed. You see a lot of details that happens. And the thing with Instagram and Twitter, and to some extent Facebook, is that people are very willing to share too. And if you admit your ignorance, then they're more than willing to share. The other thing is lots of reading. I like reading. But it's really the attention to detail. I did spend 20 years in Japan. So if you're going to learn how to look at things in detail, go and spend 20 years in Japan.
I think, well, you know, I'd love to go spend 20 years in Japan, but for those who are remaining in the Southwest or in the UK, I think that, you know, really approaching these churches with an archaeological perspective is really important. As many of you know, I'm a master's student in historic interiors, and I'm told very much like Sir John Soane was teaching as well all those years ago. I'm taught to draw the churches and the details of architectural devices, and I think that's really important for any of the students here as well, and the approach going forward. So thank you for that. It's extremely visual, your methodology, and that's what I appreciate so much. Leslie has a question. Do you have any thoughts about whether the links between Celtic Saints and some places in Cornwall were exaggerated during the Celtic Cornish revival of the late 19th century, with a desire to find saints to match place names where perhaps there were no direct links existing previously?
The danger of giving a presentation is I start giving opinions about something I know nothing about, which I've just done for 25 minutes anyway. But yeah, I'd say, I mean, with that kind of leading question, you've got to answer yes, don't you? But that's why looking at how they've been planted, their landscape, their relationship to the landscape and the communities, I think is really important, because then you can say, yeah, that looks quite possible. Or you can say like, no way, you know. I think one of the big things to take away, or a possibility to take away, is the degree of sophistication of this maritime culture. It wasn't just a few tribesmen hanging around in skins and painting the world till the Christians came along and told them not to, you know. This is a highly sophisticated culture. It didn't have writing, but you know, we equate writing with culture. That's because of our own filters. It's just not true. Lots of major cultures, lots of major civilizations have sprung up without writing.
Thank you, Devon.
Look at the Incas, for example.
Yeah. I'm actually, sorry, also tagging onto that question, I found quite a few churches associated with Saint Winwellow, and churches I never knew were associated with that saint. And I think what me and Gary Tregeger have really been talking about is how much he has been travelling, or the saint has been travelling and being associated, and we don't always know the context. So perhaps finding the context would better answer your question, Leslie. So that's something going forward for all of our students or project followers. Andy had a good question. Do you know of a similar study of holy wells linked to churches in Cornwall?
Yes, I do. There's two actually. One is, and they're both on very detailed Google Maps, which are for public sharing. I can send you the links to. I can send the links to Vicky probably, and she can distribute them maybe.
Yeah,
if you want. Yeah.
So, just to let you know, some of you who have been following us will already be aware, but we are uploading all of these virtual talks to our YouTube channel, Institute of Cornish Studies, and all of the links that we describe in the talk I'll be uploading to the description bar just below the video.
Yeah.
Lovely. So a link would be very useful. Yeah, no, you're welcome, Andy. So Linda has said, do you know, my Cornish dialect is absolutely awful as well. So I do apologise. But thank you also. And Gweden, also Cornish for trees. Am I saying that right, Linda?
TH is sort of the sound, like a soft TH. You said it was Welsh, but it's Cornish too, the same word in Cornish. So it doesn't have to have come from Wales, it's a Cornish language.
Yes.
I think it shows you the travelling of the language as well, and how it sort of almost gives testament to the travelling culture of that period, isn't it? Lovely. Well, thank you so much, Douglas. We're coming up to 4 minutes. So if we don't have any more questions, is there anything else you'd like to talk about, Douglas, before we finish the live talk?
No. One thing I haven't covered in that, I mean, I haven't covered a lot more things. We could expand that to a full, to a bit longer, you know. But one thing I haven't covered, which is worth thinking about, is why Christianity. You know, it's all very well saying that converted this, became Christians, a Christian culture, but why? And I don't have an easy answer just now, but it's worth asking, what did Christianity bring? And to that, we can look at it through various filters, and it has been economic, all kinds of stuff. but you also have to remember, back in the day, people didn't make a differentiation between their spiritual life, their economic life, their political life. So that's for me, that's a fascinating question. Why Christian? And if Saint Aristobulus is, I have no idea of pronunciation, but if he really did come, which seems quite likely, that's immensely early for somebody to travel all the way from the Middle East to just a few decades after the crucifixion of Christ, and arrive in Little Old Britain. It's a good deal more believable than Joseph of Arimathea coming here and bringing the Holy Grail, anyway. That's one question I'd like to go into. That does fascinate me. Yeah.
Lovely. So that will be the next talk we will do. Lovely. Thank you so much, Douglas.
Okay.
It's insightful. And I do urge everybody to check Douglas's website and Instagram out. His imagery is absolutely beautiful. And you do all the photography yourself, I believe.
I do, yes.
And I think you're sporting a beautiful photograph of Braunton, is it, behind you?
Yeah. Oh, no, this is Holne.
Oh, okay.
Holne, yeah.
I think the vibrancy of the colours are absolutely gorgeous. So thank you for sharing everything with us today. And just to let everybody know, please do see Harry Glasson performing live this evening. He's again performing from his YouTube and Facebook channel. So if you didn't catch him yesterday, then you should do that. Also, Douglas's articles are up on our website. So if you'd like to go to cornishmaritimechurches.co.uk and have a look in the blog section, then you will find Douglas's sort of longer articles on this subject area there. And yes, I'd like to say thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. Have a lovely weekend, and please do join us tomorrow for our last virtual event, which is actually a film screening from a film that myself and the students made about shipwrecking nature, so the impacts of shipwrecks upon the natural environment. Lovely. Well, thank you very much, everybody. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.